What was it about the Italian Job that made you, post A levels, really want to write a book about the Italian Job?
Well, I think as a 5-year-old, when I saw it, I was just mesmerised by the minis, and it was the car chase. I just loved it, and that always stayed with me. And I've always loved cars, so I've always come back to it. So no, the single answer to that, James, is the cars, was the Mini Coopers.
Do you think the Italian, because I love the Italian Job, and like I told you earlier, it's probably down to my dad, you know, it being his favorite film. We went to see it recently with the orchestra playing along. Although that actually makes you realize how little music is actually in the film. Like, you forget that the whole chase sequence is just the car sounds pretty much until they're I think it's when they get onto the water, that's when the music kicks in. Do you think the Italian Job is sort of, I mean, it's obviously sort of considered a class, it's got classic in British culture. It's got the sort of the classic lines quoted, and the song is, but do you think it's slightly underrated as a film and underappreciated?
I think it's got some really interesting undertones to it. It's actually a really good question you're asking, because the film, Troy Kennedy-Martin, who wrote it, was a TV writer. He had a lot of success. He'd devised Z-Cars, which was one of the biggest shows on British television at the time, and he really wanted to break into movies. Now, this film, he wrote it as a reaction to Britain going in to the common market, the EU, because at the time all that discussion was going on politically. Should Britain join, or should it remain independent away from the EU? And it's a satire of that. It's the British going down to Europe, stealing the gold from underneath the nose of the Italians, and getting away with it. Well, almost, I guess. And I think what was interesting is, as we approached the 50th anniversary, I was talking back with the producer, Michael Deeley, who very kindly wrote the foreword for me. And he said, well, in actual fact, what we made was the first Eurosceptic film, wasn't it? I said, yeah, I guess you're absolutely right. And he says, the fact that we're celebrating in the 50th year and Brexit's going on, we're now having the same argument that we had when we wrote it. Should we be in the EU, or should we not be in the EU? So I think, the answer to your question, is there more going on than it just being a postcard of 60s popular culture? I think yes. I think there's this political undertone going on. Whether you believe in Brexit or you don't, then I think it's a really interesting observation to make.
I just think as well, like, I don't know, it feels like it's not maybe translated down the generations as much as some of the other films of that era. And I feel like that's a shame, because actually if most people sit down and watch it, they go, oh, this is actually brilliant.
Well, the number one problem with it is it wasn't a hit in America. And still now, when you speak to Americans about it, you gingerly go into a meeting with somebody and they say, oh, what have you done? And you start to tell them about the book on the Italian Job, and they immediately think that it's the Mark Wahlberg version, the remake, okay, with Charlize Theron. And you very gently have to tell them that in actual fact was an original Italian Job, and it's far superior, and it's a classic in our country, and it starred Michael Caine. So I think that's your number one problem as to why it's not up there with those movies, is because it didn't do well in America. It never has really found its audience out there. And I think the answer as to why it hasn't found an audience there is because it's not about America at all. It's about Britain.
It's a very British
Europe.
film.
It's got British cars in it, and it's got British stars in it. So it's nothing to do with them. And dare I say it, as much as I love America and as much as I love the Americans, I think that they're possibly not interested in this film because it doesn't really speak to them. I think here it has found an audience, and it has found a cult following. And I think the reason for that is, and the reason why we're still talking about it, is that Michael Caine has remained a movie star. I mean, look, he's in Tenet, for goodness sake. He's still up there. He's in the number one movie at the box office of the UK, if we've got a box office at the moment. So he's still contemporary. He's still doing big movies. The Mini Cooper, well, it's still driving around on the streets today. It might look different, but then it's a bit, it's still here. It's voted car of the century. Quincy Jones, the music is incredible. It's got this great score, and the fact that it's got this really interesting underlying story, which is very, very relevant in this era of Brexit, I think is the reason why maybe we're going back to it and we're liking it and we're enjoying it, and it is finding an audience here. And last year I went all over the country promoting and doing appearances with the book, and I was amazed at the places we were invited to talk about it. First of all, we went to lots of car shows, which you'd expect us to be there, but we were invited to the V&A Museum to present the movie and to talk about it. Then I went to the Cheltenham Literature Festival, which, we went on stage after David Cameron, which was an interesting experience. And we spoke to 900 people about this movie.
Wow.
So we were going from the V&A to a literature festival to a car festival. And then, then we were going to maybe to introduce to a film audience. So we were finding that there were so many people that wanted to talk about this film in its 50th year that I think it definitely has found its following here, but not in America. But it's interesting. If you show it to Americans, they love it, of course, but they've got to discover it first.
Yeah. It's a hard film not to like.
Yeah, I think it is a hard film not to like, but then I would be very biased, wouldn't I? Because I've probably seen it about 100 times.
Yeah.